your point's well taken. You're not going to see nearly the amounts of tax-exempt funding or municipal funding that you've seen for sports facilities in the past. I think that's close to being over or substantially eliminated or reduced.
So now we've heard media money is close to being over. Municipal spending is close to being over. So what are we left with then? If national media, regional media, and the taxpayers are all going to cut back on spending, what does somebody like you do? You talk about private financing. What are you left with?
Well, I mean, so I'm not sure that sort of media money is sort of going down. Maybe sort of again, sort of move in the sort of distribution chain, the value chain, but
it's not going to grow at the rates it has been growing.
I'll help you here. For 25 years, I've been asked about rights fees.
Yeah,
right?
It'll be
for 25 years.
Yeah.
And every year there's a bubble, they're overvalued. I used to go in, I can remember when I was at NASCAR, I was a young guy going in and I was telling Mr. France, listen, it's going to be tough this year, we're going to have a hard time. And he goes, George, because he's been saying that for 20 years, and that was 20 years ago. And, you know, for the last 25 years, the rights have gone like this. The last 5 years, rights have gone like this. So I think it's a little premature to say that the value of sports and media is anything else but very robust. And, you know, I was looking at the ratings yesterday on the NCAA last year. Ratings were up 30%. More people watched March Madness last year than in the last 22 years. So I think it's pretty premature to say that I think the media business in sports is strong until proven otherwise. Will there be changes? Yes. But I like the industry's chances there, right? And there's an argument to be made that it's going to go up, not go down. Even in terms of as it gets more fragmented, things that bring millions of people together are going to be more valuable, not less valuable.
And Eric, I was going to say, you asked the question correctly. I mean, what's going to happen when a lot of these subsidies aren't there anymore to a degree? And I think the response is that these are now real businesses. You know, I think I've been doing this for 20 years. I think back in the mid to late 90s, if you sort of looked at a traditional professional sports team, it would have been managed in a very, very mom and pop and really rudimentary fashion. And I think you sort of look in the audience today, you've got, I don't know what, 4,000 people here saying, you know, we like sports. There's a lot that we can do in sports to make money, to develop value. And I think that's really what's going to change in sports going forward, is that these are going to be real businesses. I think they're going to be increasingly, from my perspective, they're going to be increasingly valued as real companies. And I think you're increasingly going to find a diversity of investors, certainly retail, but increasingly institutional. They're going to pay attention to this asset class and like it.
The other thing I would say is that as you are unable to, you know, I agree with Randy that sort of municipal finance is changing, right? Like you have that sort of populist undercurrent that you were talking about. And then you also have balance sheets, which are sort of a mess in a lot of places. But you end up with more sort of public-private partnership models where the club then is sort of trying to get their returns through like a real estate play, which is why you see your initial question was, you know, you're seeing all these clubs in real estate. Like that's sort of the byproduct of what you're talking about, is that clubs are looking to the real estate play sort of to enhance their returns.
Expand their brands.
And sort of expand their brands.
So then you'd think at some point, in the same way the analytics group in front offices has grown over the last 10 years, right? There was the original GM and his department, everyone there. Then you had these analytics guys coming in. Are you going to need these real estate guys? Are you going to have a whole real estate department? Oh, we're the Cubs, and these guys don't even touch the team. We're just working on deals outside the stadium.
Yeah, we have that, actually.
Right, and is that going to be across all these other teams now?
You know, I mean, I think it's to be sort of team by team, but right now you probably have 15, 20 different clubs in the 120 or so North American sports teams actively pursuing a real estate investment. So, and in those, in those situations, I would say the majority of those teams have a real estate specialist doing it, because you're putting, significant capital to work, hundreds of millions of dollars. So, I think we're there.
I mean, it's a well-run playbook. Early in my career, I was at Disney. Walt, when he did Disneyland in Anaheim, just bought the property for the park and didn't buy the surrounding area. So there was a couple of issues with that. One is the surrounding area, he didn't capture the value from the surrounding area, and the experience provided by the people who own the surrounding area wasn't very additive to the park experience. So he took that and just went the exact opposite way in Orlando, where he bought up a huge amount of swampland under a alias, Retlaw, Walter backwards, it was Retlaw Corp. And they controlled the entire experience, not just in the theme park. They have hotels, they have water park, restaurants, the whole thing. There was a whole lot more value creation in Orlando than there was in Anaheim.
I mean, look what the Cowboys are doing, which is absolutely incredible. That they're building a whole commercial development around their practice facility, right? And they're creating hundreds of millions of dollars of asset value that they've built in this complex, all around where the Dallas Cowboys practice.
The Giants have a referendum right now to do a large development contiguous.
Same thing. The Jets. A couple, 4 or 5 years ago, I went and look at the Jets. They have their training facility. There's a residential development. There's a commercial development. There's a hotel. And so now they're not monetizing the stadium. They're monetizing where they practice. And so that's just an evolution, right?
And as back to the VR point, how do you compete? You compete by creating a sort of immersive experience for your fan from the second they sort of like come onto your property to when they leave. And if you can do the things like and control that experience like Disney has, you're able to sort of curate that experience in a different way that sort of differentiates you from just putting on a headset in your living room.
What about when real estate goes down? I mean, this question, anyone can answer this question. We've seen real estate go up, go down, go up, go down. So all of a sudden, if I'm the fan of a team and their side real estate projects have suffered, are they going to start waiving players that were really good, but now they're too expensive because they got to pay for some condo that none of the fans actually care about? I know nobody wanted to answer this question.
Look to me for that one. Is that?
Well, he's an expert because they have all the real estate guys at the Cubs, so we'll defer to him.
Throwing him a bone.
I think again, it also goes back to sort of how you structure the investment. Like in our case, we have a separate real estate company, specifically for that reason, so that it's important that we're sort of recycling everything from the baseball club back into the team. Right, we're sort of a closed loop system. And at the same time, you're looking for sort of other ways to grow value, right?
And I'm going to go to Joe with that same question. So when you've got your line of billionaires ready to buy the next team that comes available, are they talking about this type of stuff? Like, I'm going to buy the team, and then I'm going to go buy a bunch of real estate with it. I'm going to start building up development. Or they focus just on the team?
We're actually working on a project, an international project right now, where real estate is a great incentive to be able to finance the team. There's so much real estate sometimes included in it. It's a very valuable. You're a brand, and that brand's and it has a loyalty brand. No one's more loyal than sports brands. I mean, people, die with sports brands on their coffins. So people are going to want to come to these places, and I don't think it's a normal real estate cycle. I think it's about the brand, and the brand will continue to bring the spectators to the facility and get the experience of what's being experienced in the sports industry.
It's also about building community. I mean, Randy mentioned this, right? But like in the end of the day, like we're community assets. Sports clubs are community assets. It's owned by an ownership group, but it's for the community. It's for the fans. And when you sort of are able to expand your footprint, and in our case, we're in a neighborhood, right? So we're building a community asset for the neighborhood. And so that's sort of another sort of element of this sort of development cycle, which is like when you have sort of corporate purpose. Like in our case, we have sort of 3 main goals, right? It's to win a World Series, to preserve Wrigley Field, and to be a good neighbor, right? And so we're trying to actually sort of enhance the community that we live in.
So if you can't win the World Series, then you go to Plan B and Plan C. Is that?
Well, no. To win the World Series is first.
It's first, right? So you skip. If that doesn't work, then you focus on the other ones.
There's 3 concurrent goals.
Randy, you mentioned institutional investors getting involved in teams. I hear institutional investors, I think about my 401k. I think about wherever they're putting their money in. Are you talking about I'm going to be invested in just some fund or whatever, and part of it is going to be involved in some Cubs investment or some team investment? Is that what we're talking about here when you say institutional?
Well, Eric, it is, and I would say that we think that there is some chance that kind of takes off. We think it's potentially one of the new vectors. I think the
vectors.
Yeah, so it's really sort of one of the new avenues that I think has the potential of taking off in finance for sports. And that is whether institutional investors, whether a Fidelity, for example, or whether a Franklin, whether they see something in Madison Square Garden networks, or whether they see something if the Boston Red Sox or the Boston Celtics were to go public at some point in time, given the diverse assets that they have, or George Pine were to take his fund public, for example. are those going to be, or do institutional investors increasingly want to try to get sports-specific exposure? And I think the answer to that is yes, increasingly yes. And I think that's ultimately going to lead to sports assets potentially trading more along the lines of normal corporate assets. Are they going to be different in some instances? They sure are. I think, as Alex has said, you have, 120 of these in the country, or 122 of these in the country, so the scarcity value will always prop up the asset value. But our view is that that could be one of the real new things that we see in sports finance over the next 10, 15 years.
Well, there's 120, let's say, big four franchises, but then Iron Man, for example, that's an asset. There's all these other, Major League Lacrosse, we have soccer, we've got, NASCAR, we've got all these other things that are just beyond that 120, and a lot of it is foreign money starting to come in. So I'll give this one to George, but where do we go here? Because, 20 years ago, this was mostly a domestic supply and demand kind of sport, and now it's changing.
It's fascinating in my little world. In the last 12 months, we've had 2 new players come in. I mean, Wanda has $65 billion. They bought Infront. They paid a very healthy price for Iron Man. And Providence Equity, they own Learfield. They own a company called Chime in the UK. Paid a premium for that. We have TPG and Silver Lake. So 12 months ago, half of that didn't exist. These are very sophisticated investors that have real demands on returns. And Wanda probably with a little longer view, being from personal wealth from China. And you see, so there's more interest than ever in the business around sports because evidently people see there's a value proposition. We certainly see it at Bruin. So it's a very interesting and dynamic time. Yeah.
With all that foreign money coming in, though, do you think they're pushing valuations too high and out of the reach of where you pay?
Well, it's always an issue. And our approach is different. We have wealthy families. We want to empower great entrepreneurs to deploy capital. So our focus is less on price and bidding wars than more, hey, this is an opportunity to grow and build. And so we very rarely participate in auctions, and we're really going out trying to find proprietary deals with people we think is special, because I think, to your point, that kind of capital deployed is not a place where they are going to push the valuations higher, and have, quite frankly.
Jeff, hearing all of this, does that make you want to invest more in sports or less in sports than you were a day ago?
I'm a sports nut. We invest specifically in sports technology companies. We invest solely in technology companies. So my focus is largely on sports technologies. I mean, I'm an investor in some of the funds George mentioned, and they're really smart guys, so no question there. The hypothetical I'm throwing out is a long-term hypothetical. One of the interesting things in Silicon Valley is you kind of get people who are trying to reinvent the future all the time, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. But when you sit in the chair, you kind of end up with a worldview that things are going to happen faster than a lot of the conventional wisdom thinks it's going to, and that there are tipping points and things along those lines. And this is one. The change in viewing, and the cord cutting, the unbundling, the millennial change in behavior is of large magnitudes and of note. And the TV business itself overall has been hammered, and then sports has been the lifeline. And so, at some point, if the patient dies, the game has to change.
But that provides opportunities too, right? So there'll be all kinds of over-the-top opportunities, right? And propping up everywhere, all kinds of new valuations. And so whenever the channels of distribution change in any business, there are going to be big winners and big losers. And what you're saying, which I would agree with, is what makes it fascinating is they're changing, and there are going to be winners and losers. And some people are going to do really great, and unfortunately some people aren't, and that's why we're playing the game we're playing, right?
The report I was referencing, the Barclays report, said the losers are current networks. They're getting hammered. The audience is down. The winners could very well be Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Hulu. Because a concept for Amazon is they're increasingly buying things to give away on the Prime bundle. They have the ability to cross-subsidize things in a major way. So competing with Amazon for a right, if they're willing to cross-subsidize, they have an unfair advantage. Netflix It's something like 70, 80 million subscribing households now. It's huge. And so you've got existing coming, then you get the newcos that are coming in with a new approach. I mean, we live on disruption. So we're huge fans of it.
And if you look, think about what Fox was before it had the NFL. It wasn't very significant. And the question I have would be, who's going to be the Fox of that group?
Yep.
And is somebody going to say, you know what, I want to tap into something that draws 114 million people on a Sunday afternoon in February and taps in, draws a 25 or 30 rating. And by the way, Yahoo did this year. They put their toe in the water. So is there going to be a Rupert Murdoch of your generation or category? Will there be one, you think?
I actually absolutely think
Because couldn't
I think
Facebook
TV in 10 years is fundamentally different than it
Because
is
couldn't
right
Facebook or Google or an Amazon just decide, we have a lot more money than big media does, we will just pay for the rights fees, and every Cubs game is now streamed directly on your iPhone, and you don't see it on TV, or something like that. It's possible.
As a loss leader to build Fox, or as a loss leader to build something else, use your balance sheet and capital to build your business. That's why sports is valuable, right?
I mean, to the point, I mean, if sports is the glue holding everything together of that ecosystem, and when you're saying, networks are getting hammered, that just, I think, sort of demonstrates the value that someone's going to capture.
I've got my iPad here with a few minutes to go. These are the audience questions. And we've got about 10 questions, and I'll pick some of the interesting ones here. So the first one is, isn't owning a sports franchise a conservative investment? The Red Sox will be around forever, but Wang and Polaroid are gone.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
But I think if you're the Red Sox or if you're the Cubs, I think that's true. But if you're, some of these teams like the Vancouver Grizzlies that just couldn't hack it in Vancouver, if you're, some of these other teams, it depends,
Well,
right?
I think location matters. Location matters. So I mean, owning the Chicago Cubs versus owning the Vancouver Grizzlies does matter a lot, but scarcity does matter. And I think it is fascinating. Obviously, we've got a lot of smart people in the audience. Go back and do a regression analysis as to what the S&P 500 has done over the last 25 or 30 years, and compare that to the valuation of the four major professional sports leagues. And I think what you will find is that owning professional sports actually gives you it's an uncorrelated asset. It actually gives you returns, or has the ability to kind of give you returns in bad markets. And I think you sort of see that, and I think that if you'll pick the right team and you'll run it well, these can be very, very good assets, very, very good investments. I think you look at the four major professional sports teams in Boston right now. They have been wonderful investments for all four of the major investors, and it's because they've run the teams well and they're in a great market.
Also depends on horizon, right? Like, so in Jeff's case, like, you may not get or even George's case, you may not get the return in the sort of the horizon that works for a purely sort of financially motivated sort of VC investor, but they're great long-term stable stores of value, and they tend to appreciate over time, and they can be tax efficient. So it's a really interesting asset class. I think it's the reason why you have all these people in the room who are sort of interested in sort of getting into the space.
What you said there makes me want to just go to Joe real quickly. When you see people who want to sell their teams and just get out, what's usually the driving factor for that? Is that the teams aren't performing well, or that they personally are just struggling and they need to recoup some money?
Well, sometimes they're struggling because when teams that I do see being sold are people that have, where most of the wealth of the team that's his wealth as the team, and they got to monetize it. But you see the larger groups that are being formed with 10 or 15 investors, that it's kind of more of a passive investment. They'll never sell. There's teams that we know that will never get out of a boardroom if they're ever sold, because the group would buy it from the other partners at will.
Which then it starts to look much more like a stock rather than just an individual owner, right? It gets to what.
Guess what
Andy was
I
saying
think you're
about
going there. I think it's a great idea. When he was talking about the institutional investor going, I was thinking in my head, geez, I could really structure great tax benefits for the remaining investors.
And another,
because the institutions don't want it.
Another avenue for sports ownership. I mean, look at Penske Corporation. What would Penske Corporation do if it wasn't involved in motorsports? That's a multi-billion-dollar corporation, really built off of the back of auto racing, right? And success on the racetrack. But that's another guy that used it as a platform. Because when you call up and say, I own the LA Clippers, it's different than calling up and say, hi, I'm George, right? So it's the owner of the LA Clippers calling, or the owner of the Boston Celtics. And look what Roger Penske built by his involvement in auto racing. He built a multi-billion-dollar business.
Do you think we're going to see more publicly traded sports teams, sports franchises come onto the market?
I think it will. I think it'll vary, or depend. I think we'll really want to sort of see how Manchester United and MSG and Liberty Braves really play out over the next 3 or 4 or 5 years. I don't think it will be for most teams, Eric, but I think there could be more than a handful of teams in large markets that end up having sort of multiple types of assets within their businesses. Those types of companies have a shot of being able to do something in the public equity markets.
And the big theme in the audience questions really relates to a lot of what we talked about. Is TV rights, the money there, and by extension franchise values reaching a bubble? With the rise in cord cutters, how concerned are teams about not capitalizing on TV revenue? What do you think the next NBA media deal might look like? Sports is the only live must-see TV left. Who's going to pay for it with all the disruptive media left, with all the disruptive media tech? Which sports are most prepared for the ongoing disruption in media? So, and then are team-owned RSNs a conflict of interest for sports leagues given the financial discrepancies they create? So most of the questions in the audience relate to the money coming from television going into sports propping up the value. So I feel like anyone could take those.
So I mean, just the 2 examples of that. I know Joe Lacob, he plays in my basketball game. He bought the Warriors, and people thought he overpaid like crazy. He made a really,
At first, they really booed him. They thought it was terrible.
He made a really intelligent arbitrage against the TV contract. Steve Ballmer, in paying an eye-popping price for the Clippers, a lot of the value was predicated on his bad local TV deal expired, and he had a good product so he could renegotiate it on top of the increase in the national deal. So I mean, the value of the franchises do seem to be highly correlated with the entertainment money.
And the good news for the industry is the media companies have made long-term bets on sports, right or wrong they have.
Yep.
And the leagues, all the leagues on their national deals are really tied in for a long period of time. So while all this disruption is going on, the major leagues here are going to have the ability to understand it, digest it, and figure out how to maximize it when their contracts are up, the most of which are in the next decade.
So, I mean, it's interesting. Typically, we're seeing this in San Francisco real estate right now. If you believe your asset is undervalued, you do a short-term deal. If you believe your asset might be overvalued, you do a long-term deal. Commercial real estate owners in San Francisco have started asking for 15-year leases of startup companies. That's just like, are you kidding me? So the fact that the leagues did these really long-term deals, do they believe their rights are
the hard part is having been at a league, the hard part is coming in every 4 years, gouging a guy after a while gets kind of old.
Yeah.
So,
so it's better to gouge him every decade?
If you can stretch it out a little bit, I think it makes for a better partnership. So to be fair, it's a fair point, but in fairness to the leagues and to the media partners, I think certainty and predictability, there's a real value to it. So I think when you look at it, all these issues will be resolved on the national level in the next decade. In the local markets, Houston and some other places, it may be playing out a little sooner, and we'll have to see how all that unfolds.
I actually, there's a part of the question in there, the NFL channel and the NBA channel. There's an interesting strategy in there somewhere that I actually don't know what it is. So anyone, I'll play moderator a second. Anyone in the panel, what are they doing?
What, the NFL Network?
The NFL Network, yeah, and directly broadcasting their own TV games. Is that the beginning of the end of television, of sports?
I think those Thursday night games are so bad, though, I don't think that's the future.
I think
less of that is probably better.
I think the interesting one is the Jaguars and Bills on Yahoo.
Okay, yeah.
Right? Because they sold rights for a game that was 100% digital other than the local market. And you say, like, why would you do that? And to somebody's point, too, is if you're going to have to reach these new consumers, that's why it's coming, because to be relevant to that consumer set that you said you'd be concerned about, you have to be where those consumers are.
Agreed.
And so if you're a league or a brand, that's on your mind. You just can't sit there and say, I'm going to ignore this generation of people that are experiencing things on those devices. So, but I think Yahoo, that game, the Bills and the Jaguars, was an interesting step.
The only thing they missed is millennials aren't on Yahoo.
They're starting. They're starting. It's one step at a time.
Exactly.
But, I mean, NBA TV, and other sort of league channels. I mean, those have actually been around for now a decent period of time. And I'll give, I just saw sort of Bob Bowman, who runs Major League Baseball Advanced Media back before we came out here, and I give him and the league a lot of credit. Where Major League Baseball is on the forefront with they've built this technology business that is a multi-billion-dollar entity, and is sort of viewed as like the market leader in actually sort of authenticated streaming technology. And so I think you will see some of these leagues sort of understand how they can evolve themselves and sort of try to get so closer to the consumer trend.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think at the very end of the day, I think the real challenge for these leagues is that they are really the creators and generators of content. And the question is going to be the way that they exploit and monetize that content today is going to be extreme, or 10 years from now is going to be, I think, completely different than it is today. Question is, are they going to be smart enough, and are they going to have the right resources to be able to get value when they do that? That's really going to be sort of the driving issue. I think it's what everybody in here is going to be able to participate in. Either through their employment or through watching, but that's really going to be, I think, the fundamental issue is whether these leagues and the teams are smart enough and whether they have the resources to figure out how to monetize their content 10 years from now.
About the leagues, one question that just got put on here, probably a Bernie Sanders voter. To what extent are returns to investments in sports franchises contingent on government protection of league monopolies?
I'd put it a couple of ways. I would say that yes and yes, or yes. I think that being able to have monopolistic or knowing that you've got a limited number of franchises, and that for a particular sport you may have a franchise or a monopoly in your market. Does that help provide value and generate value? It sure does. Does the way that professional sports is given some pretty favorable treatment in the tax code, which Joe can talk about, that drives enormous value. There's no question about that. So both of those are meaningful value drivers.
Joe, when you see this election coming up, there's another question here about what happens to valuations if the government starts changing the way they treat some of the taxes here. When you hear Ted Cruz say he's just going to get rid of the IRS, I mean, some of the stuff that people are talking about, do you look at this election and see, okay, what might happen to valuations, or is there just no relevance whatsoever?
Well, once I get by the idea that what's happening in these elections, we're sort of going to have a country at the end of it, some of this goes on. But, I've heard about flat taxes since I was 18 years old. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I think there's incentives that are there for a reason. The question is, they're going to stop us from advertising a sports franchise. On October 22nd, 2004 was the day that they changed the rule for sports franchise. It used to not be subject to this 197 depreciation. And we used to get a heck of a tax shelter out of these things. And they modified it to give us a 15-year period. Will they take that away? It's a possibility. But right now, I haven't seen anything on the counter. I probably won't see it on the counter. It's not going to generate that much revenue because it's not that big of a revenue ranger for the government. They're going to attack the hedge fund guys. Okay.
Hedge fund guys first, who then happen to also own a bunch of sports teams at the same time, right?
They're going to go after their pockets on the carried interest. They're not going to go after if they're doing anything. I know New York just is attacking that itself on the state level, but there's some interesting times.
Another question on here talks about career advice, skills and tools to acquire. Does everybody who wants to get into this business now need to either be a CPA or an MBA or a banker or a fund guy or a VC? Like what? It's so professionalized now, right? I mean, this is not at all what it used to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think the beauty is that the industry has expanded so much over the course of the last 10 to 15 years. I mean, I think that the conversation that we're having today probably isn't had in the same way 15 years ago. It's the reason why this conference has expanded so much. And it allows folks to enter into the industry in many different ways. I mean, you look at the 5 people on this panel, we all have sort of very different backgrounds and approach.
Only one of you actually working for a team and everyone else still being involved.
Right, and so the ways that you actually sort of get involved in the space are very broad. It's a function of, okay, can you marry what your interest lies in with the opportunity set?
no, I think that's right, and I'd only add to say, you know, we talk about CPAs or MBAs or people that are in private equity or VC. What really generates a lot of sports value, though, is your ability to sell. So if you can sell tickets, if you can sell sponsorships, if you can sell brand value, that's what drives value. If you're good at selling, you'll do very well in sports. You'll do wonderfully in sports. Get good people skills. That's what I would say to you as well.
It's a great business. I've been in it for 25 years. I love it, love what I've done and what I do, and I'd encourage people to pursue it. And as you see today, I mean, whether it's investment banking or legal or accounting, it's a broad industry, and the values are only going up. It means the opportunities continue to expand.
Well, cool. Thank you guys for the time on the panel today. I think that's
Thank you.
all
Thank
our
you.
time. Appreciate it.
That was great.
Tell me, am I going crazy?